When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
About the past and about the future.
Welcome back to Draftvice. Welcome back to Draftvice. Welcome back to Draftvice. That's right. We're here, right? And we're still doing this. We're pumping it through. I'm watching the interviews. I'm doing the homework, dog. And we're here to talk about the Buffalo Bills and the Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs. That's right. And I don't know which team I like to coach more of, so I'm gonna go with the Bills, right? I'm gonna not because I like them more, but I'm just gonna go with the Bills for the starter on this, right? Because they start with the letter B, and the Chiefs won a Super Bowl. They can wait, right? Let's be happy I'm doing them now. So regardless, right? We're talking about the Buffalo Bills, head by Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott, the two lovely gentlemen heading up the hopefully now the new division leader in the AFC East. Well, if you're a Bills fan, if you're one of the other three teams fans, you're hoping that that's not the case. Regardless, right? They've traded away their first-round pick in this draft, right? They got Stephon Diggs for a first, a fourth, and a fifth. That's not bad, man, right? They wanted a guy who's a veteran, who can play now, who is a leader. And they were like, you know what? We could draft a guy in the 20s, but he's not going to be as good as Stephon Diggs, right? So, listen, we got a guy in here, Josh Allen. He's on a rookie deal. Yeah, we have John Brown and we got Cole Beasley, but those guys are more they're role players. They're not true number ones. Diggs is a number one. Diggs has got talent. And you can tell because you can see the way other teams play their defense. They are afraid of Diggs. They weren't afraid of Thielen the way they're afraid of Diggs. Not that Thielen's not good, but Diggs was a whole other player. So, let's talk about it, right? That was a good move. I was a big fan of it for both sides. Minnesota needed to clear some cap, need to kind of restart fresh, get some younger guys in the room. So they trade away Diggs. They get a first rounder, a fourth rounder, a fifth rounder. We'll talk about their end of that on another episode. And the Bills get Stephon Diggs. No first rounder, but hey, you know what? They filled out some of their receiving core now. They got a guy who's a truly great route runner, an amazing receiver, and he's going to get Josh Allen throwing the ball 5 feet over his head. I'm kidding, folks. He's gotten a lot better, actually. He's gotten a lot better in the short to intermediate areas of the field, which is why I think this was a great maneuver for them, right? They're in win-now mode. You want to see how Allen is developing, and by getting him another receiver who's great at getting separation, another guy who's going to go ahead and dictate defenses, right? Now you get to pair him up with John Brown and Cole Beasley and their backfield, who we're going to talk about in a second, but Devin Singletary and Zach Moss. You have now a very flushed-out receiving core, if you will. Very talented receiving core. So let's go. Second round pick, they get A.J. Epinesa at pick 54. Right? A lot of people thought this guy was going in the first round. Even they thought he was going to go in the first round. As Brandon B said it, he was shocked that the guy fell. He does not know why he fell. He's a damn good football player, says Brandon Beane. Versatility, they love him. He could be a 3-tech. He could play base defensive end. He's gotten double-digit sack production multiple years, and he did really well in the Holiday Bowl. Good measurables as far as size and length. So, Brandon Beane was very impressed with this guy. To them, he felt like he was a first-round pick that they got in the second round. Add him to that defensive line rotation. They've now he was the top guy on their board when he fell to them, which shockingly, because a guy who a lot of teams thought, at least a lot of people probably thought he was a first-rounder for a lot of teams. Falling to that spot in the second round, very big deal. A.J. Epinesa is, we saw him beat up Austin Jackson, a guy who went in the first round, right? I guess they even made a point that maybe he fell because of, his combine performance, didn't run a fast 40. Sometimes with defensive ends and D linemen, athleticism is great, but sometimes it's about technique. It's sometimes utilizing your size and your length and your strength and your core muscles, and sometimes it doesn't come out strictly on the spark, map that they will, the little spider web. So I think they were happy they got him. They now have a very deep D-line rotation. They now have a younger guy on the D-line rotation. This was kind of a need for them, like a sneaky need. Shaq Lawson left in free agency. They get a couple of guys in on that D-line. They still have Jerry Hughes. But again, like you just want to start filling out that defensive roster. So I thought this was a good move for them. Again, like for them, they got a first-round pick in the second round. Then comes their third-round pick, right? Running back Zach Moss gets taken for them, and they were actually thinking of trading up for this guy. Like when in the second round, they weren't really super eager to trade up. They were like, you know what? There's a lot of guys left on the board that we like for this spot. We're not too worried. And when AJ up in SFL them, they were very happy. Zach Moss, they were looking to possibly trade up. They were making calls to get up to grab him because again, a lot of the running backs just kind of disappeared by the time they were picking in the third round, and they were like, you know what? Maybe we'll call up, trade up, get our running back, be able to get our guy because even teams that weren't really necessarily considered running back needy teams by them were taking running backs, and there was like a little bit of a gap where they're like, maybe we could trade up, maybe trade a fifth rounder, go up and grab them. Ended up falling to him anyway, so it was perfect. They just couldn't get up there. There were questions as maybe he fell to them because he had some injury question marks. They're not really worried about any red flags about that. They like him. They think he's more of a power. He could play outside zone. He could run gap power. He's a strong guy. He likes to take hits. Good hands, can catch out of the backfield. Did more like catching in the flat and some flare out kind of things. They're not really like not Clyde Edwards-Helaire kind of patterns. Not Austin Eckler kind of stuff, but like Kareem Hunt kind of stuff, like good enough as a pass catcher where you could utilize him in different ways, and maybe hope he could develop even more than that. He did have close to 800 touches when he was in college. He has a hard-hitting style. He liked to say, he liked making defenders make business decisions when he had to play them. Kind of a, good mentality to have for a player, right? You're talking about causing, football's a physical game. You want to cause some pain. This is how he's going to make you have to play, right? His calling card traits. He's a physical zone one-cut runner. Also play, pound it in the gap scheme. Very physical, good ball security, right? Probably that was actually something that Brandon Beane mentioned. Was that it was the ball security thing was something that they really liked about him, that other guys who went ahead of him probably would have been behind them on their board. So that was just something that he pointed out. They did look at running back as a need, which I was kind of intrigued by because, again, Devin Singletary. But, again, I think they're looking to make this a 1-2 punch. They don't want Singletary always out there. You don't always want to have to rely on one guy in your running back core. Now you got two guys. Both guys can catch. Both guys are very different style runners. Singletary's more of the shifty guy. Zach Moss is kind of the, I'm going to pound it down your throat, follow my lead blocker, take some hits. And this is also probably why Zach Moss had a very hard time staying healthy when he played in college, is he does take a lot of hits. But he is a good runner. I like the player. I think that they what they have around him as well. Again, like Buffalo's got a lot of pieces there that are really nice. The fact that they thought running back was a need for them was kind of, again, shocking, but kind of cool. Round 4, they get Gabriel Davis out of UCF. He was the highest guy on their board when they drafted him. This was one of the few times you got to hear somebody talk about, as far as like GMs go, where they were like, this guy was the highest guy on our board. This guy was in need. Like Brandon Beane was very willing to tell you that like a particular player was not necessarily as high. Like maybe it was they said 4 of the players they picked were the highest guys on their boards. Other guys they picked them like they were in the same tier kind of. Like, they might have both been round 4 picks, but they were like, you know what, this guy might have been a particular pick, and they took him in this round because, they had 2 guys similarly graded, and they would say, we'll go with the guy who we think can better make the roster, which is intriguing because that's not something you always hear about. Are guys who are better able to make the roster, right? Like guys who fill out your roster better. So that was something they kept in mind. So, Gabriel Davis, he was the highest guy on the board, right? Didn't run a variety of routes in the offense. They wanted to see his route tree. Unfortunately, COVID kind of caused that to be kind of an issue. he did come out of came out of a similar system to Baylor. Big guy, has some good run after catch, had a good year. Hands were his strong points. Get some build-up speed. Wanted to work him out privately. Was running routes immediately after the draft, so it was clear. After they drafted him, he was already outside running routes in his backyard. So it showed that they did get a little bit of a look at him at the combine. They felt like that helped a little bit. They talked to his coaches. They actually got the college to send them some practice film of him running different routes that just weren't running in the scheme. So I thought that was very interesting. I thought it's interesting to watch the way that some of these teams do their homework on some of these players when they want to get a particular guy and they're trying to really investigate. They actually drafted 2 receivers in this draft. They also drafted Isaiah Hodgins. Both these guys were big receivers, right? They drafted Isaiah Hodgins in the 6th round. They draft Gabriel Davis in the 4th round. And, there was a joke that they were making. It was like Brandon McDermott was calling all their receivers Smurfs. They got Smurfs playing wide receiver. Well, now they don't anymore. And Brandon Beane was pointing out, listen, this helps us open up our playbook. There were some plays that maybe we couldn't run in the red zone last year and wouldn't have been able to convert because our guys weren't really that tall. They weren't very lethal in the red zone. John Brown's not really a red zone weapon. Cole Beasley's definitely not a big red zone weapon. And then even Diggs is a good red zone weapon, but he's not huge. He can get vertical because he's got a good vertical leap, but he's not a tall guy. So now you got 2 big receivers who are hope to make your roster, who are going to come and compete and potentially be utilized in at least some of the red zone concepts. You rotate them in on some plays, and then you also still have Dawson Knox. You have a couple of other pieces there, but now you have an option to throw in there if you need to get a big guy in there. They also took Jake from State Farm, right, out of Georgia. Why? Because they had him in a spot where you just can't ignore him anymore. The board fell that way. Bean mentioned a lot of intriguing aspects about him. That he's a winner. Played in the SEC, has got intangibles. He's smart. Loved being around the guy at Georgia. He's going to be in that room till midnight, looking at game tape. They talk to all the coaches. The guy who loves everything about the game, the process, the prep. If he had a cannon for an arm or was bigger, he probably would have went higher. Probably would have even went day one. They said he was just too good to pass up where he was at. It was going to come in, compete with Barkley for a spot. If they keep 2 quarterbacks, they keep 3 quarterbacks. They were saying they might keep 3. He was able to hold off Easton and Fields at Georgia. They even said when he gets out of the NFL, when he gets done playing, he's probably going to be a coach in the NFL, or he's going to be a coach somewhere. So, it was very interesting because he's not the same scheme fit as maybe a Josh Allen, but there's days where you just go, you know what, this guy's smart. Maybe he has a quarterback room. Maybe you develop him and he becomes a good player. Maybe you keep 3 quarterbacks on your roster because that might become a thing more and more. As you start developing a backup, Barkley, maybe he beats out Barkley. Maybe they say, we keep 3 guys and we develop Fromm, and then next year we let Barkley walk. And now you have 2 guys on your roster. You have a guy who's cheap who could be a good backup, maybe even a trade candidate, and you just never know. And again, a very cerebral guy. And like they were saying, sometimes if you're taking Fromm in the 5th round, sometimes just guys fall to you, and you don't know what you're going to be able to get out of them. You don't know what the next step is going to be. Maybe he becomes a trade candidate down the line for a team that needs a quarterback. So I thought that was very interesting. He's probably going to end up being more of an A.J. McCarron in the NFL, but still, not a bad pickup for them. They took Tyler Bass out of Georgia Southern, a kicker. I met with him at the Senior Bowl, banged some live field goals, has some decent leg strength. They felt like he could, maybe win a spot in Buffalo. They even mentioned they wanted to go into the offseason with 2 kickers and 2 punters on the roster, just to compete in camp, just to make, competition important. Competition brings out the best in everybody, they were saying, even if they aren't going to get rid of Steven Hauschka. Round 6, I mentioned before, they drafted Isaiah Hodgins, big guy out of Oregon State. Not the highest guy on their board, but felt better that he had a shot of making their roster. And for such a big guy, they mentioned that his double move was like probably one of the best in the country. Like Brandon Bean said, like he did not see another receiver who was so good with a double move in all the tape that he watched. Drops his weight really well at the end of routes. Good, it was a deep receiving class. Maybe this guy would have went higher in other years. Didn't see, like I said before, didn't see another guy win a double moves more than he did. And they were saying before, a bunch of Smurfs at receiver. Everybody's really short. We need to get tall. Now we got 2 guys in the room who could potentially make the roster who can get tall. They also took Dane Jackson out of Pittsburgh. Several players similar at different positions, but they felt like this is a guy who they took because they felt like he can make the roster, brings a skill set they felt like could get, maybe give him a shot at being, either special teams or, their 6th defensive back, whatever they needed, or 10th defensive back, depending on how many you're rostering. 6th corner, safety, slot guy, whatever. So I thought it was very intriguing as far as how they let you in on their picks and when to take best player available, when guys are in the mix for best at a position. They were looking at wide receiver at 54, but none of the top wide receivers that they had ranked made it down to them. They felt like teams snatched it up. In fact, that was another insight of watching the Bean pressers was there was a lot of value that got kind of snatched up early. Like they felt like there was not a lot of surprises. Like you usually get a lot of wild cards thrown in there, right? Like kind of like a boom, shit. Like they took some random dude and guys fall. Well, like AJ Epinesa fell, but there were guys, sometimes you get more guys fall because like, they took some rando out of nowhere. And I guess maybe because of COVID this year, guys stuck to their board. They didn't get like wooed in by like an amazing interview process. Like, okay, like, they stuck to the tape and they said, well, you know what? Like they didn't get blown away at a pro day or something. So, they even went to like the how they were basically developing and designing their team, drafting towards winning your division, conference, and your opponents for the year, and how they kind of were stylizing to what they were trying to do. I thought Bean was probably one of the more interesting GMs to listen talk. Right, some GMs are not fun to listen to. Are very hard to like sit there and like Ballard was kind of a hard one to listen to sometimes, but decent. He's still good and very, very smart. Bean's very smart, but I felt like he was very like casual with it, if you will. Very enjoyable and very willing to like not always give you every part of the strategy, but gave you some insight into what he was maybe looking at doing. Like I said before, they didn't really reach for need too much, but if you had 2 4th-rounders on the table, 2 guys in the 4th round grade, and one guy was way lower on the 4th round grade, but you needed that position more, that's kind of where they were looking at it. Again, they felt like they also gave us a little bit of insight on how they were doing their UDFA negotiations. And I think I kind of want to do a technology episode about what COVID's kind of done and how it pushed some of these teams into certain positions, because they were talking about how their guys designed an app to help them communicate what UDFAs were getting signed at what point, when they were doing all this, so that Brandon Bean didn't have to be involved with necessarily signing UDFAs. So, or give the clearance pretty much right away. It was color coded. It would tell you, what players were like, how far along they were in the negotiating process, what other teams were they were negotiating with, necessarily that the agent was telling them they were negotiating with, whether they were still in the running, what level, like how much money and bonus were you authorized to give out for this particular player. Again, I thought this was very interesting. We're starting to hear different ways that the teams are utilizing technology and utilizing all like these kind of methods to boost their productivity. And it's something that maybe the adaptation to COVID stays in the long term. Like this might be an app they keep using for years on end. I thought this was an intriguing maneuver on their end, and it allowed for communication to be quicker, more efficient, and just allowed them to go ahead and do the UDFAs a lot quicker and be more efficient with how they were handling everything. They also talked about, again, this is why I loved Brandon Beane's presser, because he gave you information as far as patience with trading up and trading down. For instance, this is the first Bills draft that since Brandon Beane took over where there was no trades. And, he's talking about, like, if they have a real need at a position and a guy with a great grade, they're willing to trade up. They didn't really have a guy with a need at a position. They talked about, some of the schools like Iowa with AJ Epinesa, like knowing that coming out of that program, you feel really good about the guy. Injury and how injury would knock somebody down a board, where if it's an ACL, it might be a couple of rounds, or if it's a shoulder, you might not come back till October. Well, maybe that will be like one round. So there was a lot of interesting talk and a lot of discussions on as far as just methodology with how Bean operates a draft that you don't usually get as much insight on when you listen to some of these pressers. Some of the GMs are very tight-lipped, Patriots style. Some just probably aren't even acknowledging these are real things that people talk about. Sometimes it's the questions. Sometimes just some of the reporters and how the GM is willing to answer some reporters. I just felt like the back and forth was very at ease, and just Brandon Beane was willing to give you an insight in how the operation was working. I thought this was very good. I liked listening to Brandon Beane. I feel like this is a very good roster. They had a very good offseason. They lost a couple of guys. They lost Jordan Phillips and Shaq Lawson, but they also re-signed Quentin Spain to a 3-year deal. They signed Darrell Williams, former Panthers tackle. They signed E.J. Gaines, the cornerback. I feel like is a very good depth piece. Is when he's healthy, he's played really well. You have him compete with Josh Norman opposite Trey White. You got Vernon Butler, formerly of the Panthers. A lot of former Panthers guys. Quentin Jefferson, formerly of the Seahawks, to a 2-year deal. They signed Mario Addison, formerly of the Panthers, to a 3-year deal. A.J. Klein, formerly of the Saints, to a 3-year deal. And they signed Josh Norman to a $6 million 1-year deal. I mentioned before, they traded for Stephon Diggs. They signed Brian Cox, defensive end, formerly of the Browns. And, and they also signed UDFA Trey Adams out of Washington, a guy who a lot of people thought was going to be a first-round pick coming into the year, had some injuries, never really came back to full strength. That's a guy who, if he makes the roster, sticks to the team, could be a very good depth piece for them down the line. He's had some good games in his film, so it's a guy who, again, like now they are a destination for some players. Yeah, I feel like their offensive line, a position that 2 years ago was not very strong, is now probably one of their strongest positions in for their whole roster. Whether you're talking about Spain or Williams or Morse, Mitch Morse, who ended up being very good for him this year. Cody Ford, who's played well for him. They've got a lot of good pieces that they've managed to keep on this roster and just keep on building. Ed Oliver did get a DUI with a weapons charge over the weekend. Listen, I don't like commenting on. I did the Seahawks and Giants episode last week, and then all of a sudden, literally the day it releases, what was it, Dunbar and DeAndre Baker both get arrested for weapons charges. Armed robbery. Sorry, yeah. And again, I don't like commenting on it because I happen to understand that a lot of those cases are very all over the place, right? So, like, for instance, Ed Oliver, right? Misdemeanor DWI or DUI or low-level DUI. Some states, like, again, some states don't even have DUIs as a crime. Some states have them as a misdemeanor. Sometimes it's a traffic infraction. So with, he had a low-level DUI, but he had a gun in the car, he had a weapon in the car, wasn't registered, whatever it is, he had a weapons issue. It's very possible, again, you're living in Texas, it might get thrown out. Like, again, we're talking about stuff like, okay, DUIs are a big deal, but they're not as big of a deal as people, if it was just a DUI, nobody would be even paying attention. They'd be like, he got a DUI, that freaking moron Ed Oliver. But nobody was talking about him not potentially being at the virtual offseason like they're talking about some of these players. And again, like, you're in Texas, a lot of guys have guns in Texas. I don't have a gun. I don't live in Texas, but now that's the only place where people have guns. Maybe I do. I just, don't come near me. Bye. No, I'm kidding. I'm just saying. So for something like that, I don't really like particularly talking about cases, although, like, it has to be addressed. there's a lot of opportunity for this to go different ways. We're hearing a lot now about the DeAndre Baker and Quentin Dunbar cases as we move forward, that there's new affidavits and things like that. And maybe I'll spend a day going over some of these cases as they get kind of more developed. But, like, commenting too much on the facts, like, people go, oh, I can't believe these guys. This guy's an idiot. This guy's doing, what is this guy doing? We just don't know. Right? There's a lot of factors that go into that. Yeah, like, I do think that there's some of it is they aren't in structure, and that could be an issue. There's also just the fact that stuff happens. You got a bunch of people, you got a bunch of young guys with a lot of money, and, at least 2 or 3 of them is going to get in trouble every year because it happens. People get in trouble. It happens. And not all the times are they actually guilty of what they're being accused of. So, regardless, it sounds like they're okay with what's going on, that they feel like he'll get it resolved because they are okay with him coming to virtual meetings, and not that I think that that's actually going to help you anyway if you're in a big trouble. Regardless, I just kind of like how the Bills handle things. So, we talked about their free agency on another episode. I just wanted to run it through, and that's why I mentioned all that stuff. So other than that, like, I think their roster is really good. Like I said before, man, if you have a shot to listen to Brandon Beane talk, go do it, because he's willing to let you in on some insight. He's willing to give you the idea of, like, oh, this is how you build a roster. This is how you are utilizing technology to your advantage. They also had if you look at their roster, right, talked a bit about it, right? Their receivers, they have Diggs and Brown and Cole Beasley. They still don't really have a lot of depth at receiver. Those top 3 guys are really good. Beyond those 3 guys, it's kind of a weird mix of, like, Isaiah McKenzie, Duke Williams, Robert Foster, Ray McLeod, guys who are like, and guys who they drafted this year. Kind of a weird mixture of dudes. You're not entirely sure how they're going to play. You look at their tight ends. They got Tyler Kroft, who they signed last year. Dawson Knox, who was a second-round pick last year, a third-round pick last year for him. Offensive line, John Feliciano, Cody Ford, Mitch Morse, Quinn Spain, Deion Dawkins, Tyan Secchi, Darren Williams, Evan Boehm they signed as well. Spencer Long. They have very good depth as far as their offensive line goes. Josh Allen has a lot of good pieces around him, right? Offensively, and they got a lot out of him. They schemed it up really well, and he showed growth last year. I'm impressed. I'm impressed with how they've developed him. I'm impressed with their coaching staff. I'm impressed with Darrell Bevel. I'm impressed with how Josh Allen's developing. He still needs to go further. He still needs to get better at certain things, but he has gotten better at certain things. He's no longer, just utilizing his athleticism. He's learning how to throw, and he's been getting better at throwing, in the intermediate areas of the field. He's still having a hard time with deep ball accuracy, but again, those are things you can develop. I like what I see from this roster. I love this coaching staff. I'm a huge fan of Sean McDermott, and I like the Bills. I'm like a far off, like, if I didn't love the Browns, like, the Bills would be my next team. Like, I like the Bills that much. I think the Bills are a very intriguing team. It's another one of those teams that's a downtrodden franchise. Now they're on the upswing. I like how they've helped build up this roster, how they've built up this defense. And let's talk about this defense, right? They got Trent Murphy, who I think might end up losing his job eventually, because you just look at all the other guys there, right? Star Lotulelei, Ed Oliver, Vernon Butler, Quentin Jefferson, Jerry Hughes, Mario Addison, AJ Epinesa, like, a lot of good players here, you guys. Harrison Phillips, linebacking core, Matt Milano, Tremaine Edmonds, AJ Klein. They filled out the linebacking core. Trey White, Jordan Poyer, and Micah Hyde were the keys to that secondary becoming so good so quickly. Their high-end play and their signings turned this team around, and then the drafting of Trey White. Those 3 guys are the keys to their defense, and they show, and they even reward them for it. They just they just extended Poyer. I love these guys. I love their players. I love how they utilize them, and I love how they have an idea and a mindset of what they want to go for as far as developing their team. The rest of their cornerbacks, they got Levi Walsh, Josh Norman, E.J. Gaines, Taron Johnson. Again, they are building out the rest of the roster, and there doesn't really seem to be a true weakness here. Maybe the corner opposite Trey White, But again, I don't feel like it's that bad of a weakness. Where going into this year, I think they do need to kind of find another guy eventually who could be the future opposite of him. But everything else here is great. I like this team. I like Sean McDermott. I think he's a great coach. I like his defensive scheme. I think they've gotten the most out of this roster, and they keep on doing more and churning the roster and just making it better. I think the Bills. I think there's a reason why people are talking about the Bills as a playoff contender now, as like as a leader of the AFC East, as far as potentially being a dominant force in the AFC in general. And potentially even maybe getting into a Super Bowl, if all things crack right. I like this team. I like McDermott. I like the Bills, and I like their draft, man. I've not always agreed with every move that Bean and McDermott have made, but man, dude, they are proving me wrong. They're proving me wrong. Listen, they know shit more than I do, so let's go with Bills are good. The Bills are good. So we talk about the Bills. The Bills are good. All right. Let's talk about the Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs, everybody. With Andy Reid and Hunt and Veach, Brett Veach, right? So, let's talk about them. Let's talk about it. First off, if there was a team that was attacking my heart, right? Like, maybe didn't always pick guys at the best value, but was definitely attacking players I liked, it was Kansas City. First round pick 32, they take Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Man, if you know anything about me, you know I like myself some Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I like him like that. Mm-hmm. Dude is a good pass catcher out of the backfield, good lateral movement, very good vision. He was a driver of the offense at LSU. He was one of the three pieces of the LSU offense that made it work. And I'm telling you this much, him going to Kansas City, oh my God, that's scary, sir. They don't care about defense. They said, screw it, we're just going to do offense. But we're going to do offense in a way that makes everybody afraid. Now, I know people are like, well, they don't. Pat Mahomes isn't going to check it down. Dude, you got Clyde Edwards-Helaire wide open. You're going to throw it to him, right? He's going to get you 15 yards. He's going to do very well. He's going to break tackles. And now, listen, he's not going to get handed the starting gig right away, but he's definitely better than Darrell Williams, right? I think Pat Mahomes is great. I think they got a good receiving core. I think they got a lot of weapons. They're going to continue to churn the offensive line talent on this roster, right? They even drafted an offensive lineman in the third round called Lucas Niang, another guy who I really like, out of TCU. Again, a guy who, had he not had injuries, you probably could look at him. He probably would have went much higher in this draft, but and is held up against Chase Young and Nick Bosa. Again, very good player. People were confused with his footwork. I think that was because some of his tape showed him currently, because he got injured not really like late. He got injured during the season, but he was playing through the injury for quite a bit, and then he eventually went out. If he did not have that injury, I'm pretty sure, and he got to play the full season healthy, he would have been a top first-round pick, probably. First round, top 50 pick, hands down. He was that good of a player when he was healthy, and then, some of his tape looks kind of weird to people because they're like, what's going on with his footwork? And part of his footwork problem was he was injured. It was, you had to kind of change the way, like, it was really hard for him to play. Now, if you look at tape from the year before, it looks a lot better. And even still, when he was playing, even with the weird footwork and the torn labrum in his hip, he was still pretty darn good. So, Brett Veach was very intrigued. So we'll talk about Edwards-Helaire for a little bit again, then we'll go down the list. Worked through the pocket of players who saw that might be there at 32. They felt like he's a unique player with unique talent. They felt like he was the best player available. He's extraordinary. Good interior running ability, plays the game with motion, lateral ability, has all the traits, explosive, can make something out of nothing. I agree with all these statements. Yes, you and me, Veach, we're on the same page. When working through final wave of the process, they sent Andy Reid some of the clips of like, hey, you might like this guy. And he's like, dude, this guy's better than Brian Westbrook, a guy who Reid personally has had dealings with. And, he's an all-business player, loves the game, picks it up very quickly. He's going to come in and learn the offense. High football IQ, high character guy. Ed Orgeron talked about him to all the coaches and was like, "This guy's amazing." And he's gonna allow you to spread out a lot of the defenses, right? Not just with his route running, but again, he's very east-west kind of player. Good lateral ability. Their guys are all moving fast, good moving downhill, downfield. You got McCall Hardman, you got Tyreek Hill, you got Travis Kelce. So you guys got, you now have basically you are playing 5 wide on every play, right? You are full on open every play. There's always a weapon or a piece on the field that you can throw to if you are Pat Mahomes. They are surrounding him with talent. And it was just it was a very good situation. He could fit a gap scheme, a zone running scheme. Kansas City runs a little bit more gap power than say some other teams, but they run zone as well, and a very diverse running scheme as well. Round 2, they took Willie Gay Jr., right? They felt like he was a first-round value player. We hear this all the time from teams. This guy's a first-round value who's high on our board. I think they really meant like they really liked the player. Very athletic. He only played 5 games because he had a suspension. But they did their homework on him. They kind of figured out the issues at college. They talked to the coaches, got an idea of his background. They feel like their linebacking room and Spagnuolo and everybody there is going to make him better and keep him grounded. And listen, you know what? They really like the player. He's really athletic. He's going to be an addition to. He got faster on defense now. Again, like Spagnuolo's defense, it's got it takes time to learn. Now now they're a year in there. They have another guy who's going to fit into that defense. It took. Now you have a scheme that you are now running. You're in the second year of this defense. Now you're starting to pull pieces to go ahead and stick in there and get your best productivity out of it. Meanwhile, really what you're just doing is trying to just play decent defense for a while you have your amazing offensive explosion of flavor known as the Pat Mahomes Kansas City Chiefs offense. I mentioned before they took Lucas Niang. He's going to probably compete for a guard spot, they said. I thought that was very intriguing. But they're really looking for him to be the long-term answer at tackle at some point, potentially. What they'll do is probably cross-train him. If he makes it onto the ones, he'll be a guard on the ones, and then he'll probably play at tackle on the 2s and the 3s. They felt like depth and speed at linebacker was a need. Depth at O-line was a need. Remember, last year, there were a lot of injuries on the offensive line. They did need to play Cam Irvin at tackle. So whenever you have to play Cam Irvin at tackle, you need better offensive linemen. That guy was drafted to be a center by the Browns. And now you're playing him at tackle on the Chiefs. That's kind of how guys like Pat Mahomes get injured. So now they're adding more to that roster. Also, apparently he's fluent in French, which Laurent Duvernay actually is also fluent in French, apparently. Apparently, they have a whole French-speaking offensive line. They could do some pretty cool play calls. That's going to be intriguing. They're going to be like, Chaka me bleu. Oh, all right. We're going to shift the protections to the left. Oui. Anyway, speaking of oui, don't know why I said that. Chase Young had a hard time playing against Lucas Niang. Apparently, he had actually mentioned it from when they did play each other. Let's move on to they also drafted safety corner L'Jarius Sneed in the 4th round, was the top of their board on day 3. They drafted Mike Dan out of Michigan, round 5. They took Thacarius Keys, who they traded back into the 7th round. They traded a 6th-rounder pick next year to get back into the 7th round because they looked at the draft, how he was falling, traded a future 6th for the 7th in this draft because they knew he was going to get drafted. And they figured next year they're going to have some compensatory picks. They weren't too worried about losing out on that. And they like him. They feel like he fits their press man scheme, which is kind of what they're trying to run down in Kansas City. So they'll fill out their roster there. They feel like he can make the roster. They like him. They feel like Dan is going to give them some versatility and options on the defensive line rotation. Now they moved to that 4-3. They, have guys who are going to start filling out that roster as well, be able to play tackle or, play like 3-tech or play, base D end. And again, I feel like they really were they didn't need to really do a lot to make this team better, right? Like they were already so good, but they needed to stay on top of it. And you look at their first 3 picks, I think they did very well. You got an athletic, rangy linebacker who is going to be working with Anthony Hitchens and Tyrann Mathieu, and they like playing these 3 safety looks, and now you're going to have a very athletic linebacker to throw in there as well. Maybe utilize him in the blitz a little bit too, because again, he's fast as hell. So their defense, they're building out the defense a little bit, making it hard to throw through the center of that defense. And then you also have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who is going to be adding an aspect to this offense that you just did not have. That is, like maybe the missing link, right? Like, oh, we won the Super Bowl, and the one way we can get better was we got a guy who basically is a receiver out of the backfield, but also an amazing runner with great vision and great lateral quickness, and also, quite honestly, good contact balance. So I honestly, like, I have mixed feelings on value for those first 3 picks, but not too much. I like all 3 players a lot. Every time I've seen bits and pieces of these 3 players, they were players that I wanted to go to my own teams at some point, like teams that I really, really liked. So Kansas City, man, you guys are just building on strength, man. You are getting a better team. Continue dominating in the Super Bowl. Let's talk a bit about their free agency, right? They signed Taco Charlton after he was released by Miami. They signed Rashad Breeland to an extension, who unfortunately is having some legal troubles of his own. They released Colquitt, the punter, who I believe retired anyway. After that, they franchise tagged Chris Jones. They signed DeAndre Washington. They re-signed Demarcus Robinson, the receiver, to a 1-year, $2.3 million deal, and restructured Sammy Watkins' contract. I guess that helped keep both of them on the roster. So now their receiving core is pretty much still very good and still pretty much the same as what they were going in with. They signed Ricky Seals-Jones, the tight end, who's been on Arizona and the Browns. He's kind of going to be like a tight end 3. Maybe he makes the roster. Maybe he's a special teams guy. Very, matchup weapon. If you want to play 2 tight end sets a little bit more. They signed Mike Remmers, formerly of the Giants and the Panthers and the Bears. Oh my, what? No, he wasn't on the Bears. I think he was on the Vikings at one point though. So again, another offensive tackle who they wanted to go ahead, grab, stick on their team. Maybe he'll play a little bit of guard as well, compete for a spot on the roster. So now you have him kind of being like, he's kind of the late stage version of Lucas Niang. Actually, he's just kind of, but they didn't know they were going to get Lucas Niang where they got Lucas Niang. So gives them some depth and some versatility on the roster. He's going to go ahead and convert to guard as well. So let's talk about the roster, right? We talked about the free agency. We talked about the Chiefs, re-signing Robinson, restructuring Watkins. They, they did a lot of moves in free agency as well as in the draft as to filling out the offensive line room. So let's talk about it, right? By the way, they still have Mitchell Schwartz. They still have Laurent Duvernay-Tardif. They have Austin Ryder, who's going to play center for them. They get Nick Alighieri. I don't know who he is. It sounds like Dante Alighieri is the guy who wrote Dante's Inferno, his brother. Eric Fisher, their left tackle. Like I mentioned before, they had signed Mike Remmers in free agency. They drafted Lucas Niang. So they got a lot of pieces there that they're going to go ahead and let's say Darrell Williams. Thought that Darrell Williams is an offensive lineman they got in free agency at UDFA. So yeah, again they're adding to this offensive line because again we saw they had depth issues last year, going in their run up to the playoffs and the Super Bowl, and trying to get guys on cheap deals because again you're gonna have to re-sign Pat Mahomes. Probably Eric Fisher or Schwartz are probably coming to the end of their deals soon. So that's why you draft Lucas Niang, you develop him, and maybe he goes ahead and becomes, your tackle of the future at a position, or at least he's a depth piece that can play tackle as well. Like I said before, you got Patrick Mahomes. They got some interesting pieces as far as receiver, they got Byron Pringle, Demarcus Robinson, Tyreek Hill, Sammy Watkins, McCall Harmon. Those are kind of the guys that potentially contributed last year. They didn't really add many other pieces that make you think that there is going to be much more competition for those spots. Travis Kelce, still Travis Kelce. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Damian Williams, Darwin Thompson, all going to be very interesting players. I think, and Elijah McGuire, former Jet's going to be there too. I think the Darwin Thompson thing, right? That's a guy who I was hoping would end up sparking up this year. Probably not going to be the case. Now you have Damian Williams, Darwin Thompson, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire that you never really know. Guys pop at all different times. Offensively, man, it's still good. I still think the weakest link for the offense is probably still through the offensive line, especially through that interior. But I do think the pieces that they got helped go ahead and fill out that room. Defensively, I think it's going to be an underrated defensive. The defensive line is kind of underrated, right? They have Alex Okafor, kind of more of a run defending D end. Formerly of the Saints, who they had for the past year. Now he's going to be in his year 2 with the Chiefs. They have Chris Jones, franchise tagged. Derek Nottie, who played nose tackle for them, who's played pretty well at nose tackle for them, actually. Frank Clark, who they traded for from the Seahawks, who really hasn't been the piece that they were thinking he would be when he came over. Breland Speaks, Kalen Saunders. Kalen Saunders is another guy who rotates in at D tackle, oftentimes even at nose tackle at points. Mike Pennell, Tano Campasino. Too many freaking consonants in his name, Campasino. They signed, like I said before, Taco Charlton. That's an intriguing piece that maybe, again, you need edge rushers. You lost Emmanuel Ogbah. He went to the Miami Dolphins. Not that he did a lot for them, but, they do need to fill out the roster at certain spots, and that was a high upside pick, a guy who can maybe make the team and potentially be a rotational edge rusher for them. And can actually probably play base DN for him as well if he, got stronger. I think there was some, I don't know, I think there was some locker room in between the ear stuff. Not that I'm saying he's a bad guy or he's a bad learner. I'm just saying it seems to me that there's not it has not been cohesion between him and the 2 coaching staffs. Let's put it that way. Linebacking core, you got Damian Wilson, Anthony Hitchens, Willie Gay Jr. now. Corners, right? They got Travaris Ward, who they're looking to see take a step forward. They didn't really address corner very much in the draft like I thought people thought they would. I think that was probably why people might have looked at the Helaire pick or even the Logan Wilson pick and went, really? You could have went for a different player, a different position, a different point. But still, I think their safety room is kind of where they have a lot of good depth. They got Juan Thornhill, they got Tyrann Mathieu. Juan Thornhill is coming off an ACL though, so we have to see how he develops with that. Kind of had a late ACL as well. Rashad Breeland, we mentioned he's having some legal troubles right now, so we don't know when he's going to be really playing for him. I could see them going for somebody in free agency, like a cheap 1-year deal. Maybe they re-sign Mo Claiborne. Maybe they sign Eli Apple. Some other, free agent corners, Darqueze Dennard. They seem to like the slot cornerback kind of, turn them into something else kind of hybrid maneuver for them. So maybe they go ahead and go for some other pieces to add to that cornerback room if they can get them on a 1 or 2 year deal at a cheap rate. Safety room, I kind of like the safety room. Again, if Juan Thornhill comes back healthy, Armani Watts, I kind of like him as a safety linebacker hybrid, plays strong safety really well. He was drafted by them last year. But again, now I think the defense, defense is definitely still a weakness. Corner is definitely still a weakness on this team. In fact, I feel like it's been the weakness on a lot of the teams I've been talking about in that because they didn't get to address it in the draft. And that corner is a hard position to fill out. So you're looking at guys to take step forwards, but even still, there's nobody here who they drafted relatively high who you're expecting to take a step forward. Maybe like Travaris Ward, I think they're expecting to take a step forward, but not I don't know. I don't think he's really the kind of guy who you're really oh, this is a star guy who they're thinking is going to take a step forward. So they really do need to fill out the corner room on this roster. D-line's pretty good, though. Linebacking core we've seen has some potential here. Hitchens kind of more of a run stopper, 2-down thumper. but they've got some pieces here. Overall, again, wouldn't be shocked this team makes it back to the Super Bowl this year. They're a repeat offender, if you will. Last year they had some hardships with some injuries, and they still made it to the Super Bowl. So imagine this team was totally clean, healthy going into the year, and Mahomes was healthy the whole time, and now every piece was kind of like a little weird. There were pieces that I thought there were guys they could have drafted that I thought would have been good additions to this roster. Like I said, corner, there were some decent corners, especially where they took Hilaire, and even they could have traded up in the second round. I felt like they could have taken Fulton or Jalen Johnson, Trevon Diggs. There were guys available that I thought were good fits for them at certain points. They didn't go for. Instead, they again. What does that mean to me? I think it means, like, listen, we got firepower, we got offense, and you saw them piece it together on defense last year. I think that's going to be the plan. We're going to piece it together on defense as much as we can, and if that, and worst comes to worst, if that fails, we've got an offense that can fire on all cylinders at any given time. We could break a game. So, listen, I like the Kansas City Chiefs roster. I like what they've done. I like the team. I'm looking forward to this year. They're going to dominate again. If you want, follow the podcast at Draftvice on Twitter, at Draftvice_football on Instagram. You can follow me at BROJO. Death is in the end of life. Punch like that thing you drink in the summer. And like, follow, subscribe. I've done a bunch of these videos at this point. I've done one on the Cowboys. I've done them on the basically every AFC East team. No, I haven't done all the AFC East teams. I've done all the NFC South teams. So Falcons, Saints, Panthers, Tampa Bay. I've done the Chargers. I've done Jacksonville. The Saints. I mentioned the Saints. Yeah, so go ahead, check it out. I got the Lions as well. They were a fun one to talk about. The Raiders. By this point, the Raiders have been up. So yeah, check out all those videos and subscribe. I also have a new project. Probably by the time this comes out, it'll be a day from the release of the first video. I'm hoping. I'm saying this. It's called Punk Law 101. Look it up, everybody. It'll be on this channel. So it'll be on the channel for the YouTube. Go ahead, check it out, have fun, and have a nice week, and I will be right back.
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
About the past and about the future.